For any of you who attended the Finding Faith Christianity, I don't know what that was. It was a blur at IANT last fall. One of the key contributors to that was Brother Mohsen. He's someone whom I respect deeply in the field of dawah, and his research in the field of comparative religious studies is something that has and continues to inspire me. So I ask you all to give a warm salam and sincere welcome to our beloved brother Mohsen. He'll be taking it away from here.
Barakallahu fik, Isa. I think I consider myself the downgraded version of Isa, so don't worry, inshallah. I'm here, inshallah. We're going to have some fun today, and we're going to learn. I don't know, fun has a very, people think like whenever we think about Islam, it's like Islam is all, they think that fun is the antithesis of Islam, but really it's like, just read some of the things in Islam and tell me you're not having fun. I mean, it gets really interesting, man, especially I'm weird. I like the arguments. I like the disagreements sometimes. There's not a lot of them, but when there are, they're so rich, and you get to see the scholarship really come out. So inshallah, we're going to have a little bit of fun today. I need everyone, please, to participate with me and to help me through this, because I really don't want to be the only one talking. I can talk for a very long time, but I like participation because that keeps you awake and that keeps me a little bit on my, excited as well. Okay, so inshallah, let us begin. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. أبدأ كما قال كريم الله في سورة طه رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. الحمد لله رب العالمين رب العزة والجلالة. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. الصلاة والسلام على رسول الله على حبيبنا وشفيعنا محمد الهاشمي ابن عبد الله ابن عبد المطلب ابن هاشم ابن عبد مناف ابن قصي ابن كلاب ابن مرة ابن كعب ابن لؤي ابن غالب ابن فر ابن مالك ابن النضر ابن كنانة ابن خزيمة ابن مدركة ابن الياس ابن نضر ابن معاد ابن مضر ابن نزار ابن معاد ابن عدنان، ومن عدنان إلى ابن إسماعيل ابن إبراهيم إلى ابن سام إلى ابن نوح إلى ابن آدم عليهم الصلاة والسلام، ورضوان الله على الأصحاب أجمعين، وأحسنهم أبي بكر الصديق، أبي حفص عمر رضي الله عنه، عثمان بن عفان ابن أبي العاص، والحيدر علي رضي الله عنهم جميعا. قال الله في سورة الذاريات, and this is a very important verse inshallah for us to think about today. وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. Allah Azza wa Jal says in the 51st chapter of the Quran, Surah Al-Dhariyat, in the 56th verse, I have not created the jinn or the ins except to worship me. This is something very important because as we talk about Hinduism today, you'll realize that the central goal of Hinduism is to know how to worship God. And so we're going to talk about that a little bit. Now, do they hit the spot on that? Well, it's not Allahu Alam. No, they don't. But there's something we're going to discuss about Hinduism, some things we're going to discuss about Hinduism today that inshallah will be beneficial. And so inshallah we will begin. How do I start this present? There we go. Okay. So fair warning. Okay, did it start? I can't. Okay, there we go. Whoa, I didn't even know that did that. What is happening? Sorry, technical difficulties. We're good. Okay. Let's see if we can start this up. Okay. So before I begin, I would like to make a small disclaimer that you are all used to, Ustad Isa's awesome presentation styles. I am not a very awesome presenter. I don't have very nice presentations. I try, I promise I do, but it's really not that great. But inshallah, I want you guys to focus more on the discussion portion. One of my teachers, when I was taking one of the classes, one of my teachers actually told us that, a presentation, people don't know how to use presentations anymore. One of the few people that still knows how to use presentations that I've come across is Ustad Isa. But I don't know how to use presentations that much. And, presentations are not supposed to have blocks of text and everything, right? There's supposed to be markers, right, that you reference whenever you want to talk about something important. So I do give you a fair warning, inshallah, for that. All right, let us begin. Let us talk about before we even start the discussion of Hinduism, let's talk about certain preliminary analysis before we even dive into this discussion with Hinduism. First, I want to talk about the bias discussion. Now, number one, we have chats, yay. Lol, did you copy paste the book? I'm joking. Oh, sorry. I'm going to read all your comments. It's going to be right. How do I take my right back? Isa, you heard me. Make dua. Yes, absolutely. Make dua. Okay. So let's talk about the bias discussion real quick. In anthropology, there's this concept, and really in every field of science, there's this concept of bias, right? And we have to accept that everyone comes in with something called implicit bias, right? And something at the root of it, fundamental bias, right? Nobody is not biased. Everyone has at least a certain degree of biasness to them. Now, can you control a part of it? Yes, you can control part of the biasness, but the other part you cannot control. However, this whole, exploration into or getting into a concept and being non-partial to it, it's good when you're trying to find the truth. It's good. But when you know the truth, it's not good. Why? Because how can you, let's say you have a truth and you have falsehood. How can you be biased toward, how can you not be biased towards the truth? That is the fundamental desire of humanity, right? How can you be impartial between justice and injustice? Right? We're always so like, no, we should always be for justice and against injustice. Well, when it comes to truth and falsehood, we should always be biased towards the truth. And so this is something that just going, starting off, I admit I am biased towards Islam. I am a Muslim. After researching, after doing my homework, after Allah Azza wa Jal guiding me, because all the homework and all that I can do nothing if Allah Azza wa Jal didn't want to guide me. But alhamdulillah, Allah Azza wa Jal guided me. Allah Azza wa Jal guided all of you. And that's a gift from Allah Azza wa Jal. And so we're here today to discuss Hinduism, and we're going to do it with a certain degree of biasness. But at the same time, that doesn't mean our analysis is incorrect. Okay, and I'm gonna actually, you'll see, I'm actually very appreciative of a lot of concepts, and I hope I can pass that I'm gonna make up words, appreciativeness to all of you guys, okay? And so inshallah, it'll be fun. Let's start with, and let's move on to the second point, wisdoms of the past. This is where I wanna talk a little bit more about, why study Hinduism? Is there even any point to them? Is there any wisdom to them? Everything we know from Islam is the truth, right? But Islam did not start with the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? The last final chapter of this long saga of Islam started with the Prophet Muhammad sallam, and the Prophet sallam being the greatest prophet, and the religion of Islam as we know it today to be the last religion till and the last Sharia till the Day of Judgment. But before that, we know many prophets came. We know many, the message of Islam was spread in the past throughout earth, right? And so, is it possible that there are still wisdoms of the past that exist today? It's very possible. Does that mean that Islam is lacking something that the Islam we have today? No. Sometimes reading wisdoms of the past can make a connection in your mind to something, or even serve as a reminder to something you already learned in Islam, and it just reinforces your belief in Islam. Let me give you an example. For instance, when we read about the Old Testament or the New Testament, or any of the really scriptures of the past, we say that they've been corrupted. Right? And there's a discussion on this, right? Is the corruption explicitly just tahrif al-ma'ani, or is it tahrif, lovely? Like, is it a textual changing, or is it a interpretational changing? And really, the best analysis on this seems to be it's both, right? But talking about these things, does it mean that everything in the Old Testament and the New Testament is false? Not necessarily. There's a lot of things that we would agree with. And that's why Islam, the Quran, comes as the Furqan, the criterion with which we judge. The Sunnah is also, we know so many things from the Sunnah, and we'll discuss this hadith right there, that, there's nothing wrong necessarily in going into and investigating these things. With the condition that is done using certain parameters, because you can get lost. And so we should be careful of that. So that's one thing. Now, I want to talk about this really, 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 really interesting hadith right here. Okay. And this hadith, this is found in Sahih al-Bukhari. And tabarakallah, when we say Sahih al-Bukhari, nobody even needs to question if it's Sahih or not. It's Sahih. But if you wanted extra verification is right there. It's sahih, right? And this is from Abdullah ibn Amr radiallahu anhu, and he reported, we know the famous hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? Convey from me even a single verse. Now, for some reason, whenever people always say this part, but very few people actually say the entire thing, right? Very few people say the entire thing. And a lot of distrust, we have this attitude of distrust towards ancient texts. And that's fine. There should be some degree of mistrust. However, the Prophet ﷺ here clearly says, وَحَدِّثُوا عَنْ بَنِي إِسْرَائِيل. What does that mean? Narrate from the children of Israel, for there is no blame in it, right? And then the hadith continues, whoever deliberately lies about me, let him take his seat in hellfire. This is actually, by the way, a very interesting side point. But, I'm going to go into a lot of tangents, so excuse me. I'm really going to try not to, but I'm still going to do it anyways. It's like that one time I asked a friend for advice, and they gave me advice, and they said, you're not going to follow this advice. And that's exactly what happened. I didn't follow that advice, and I regretted it. I think I regretted it. Actually, not really. I don't know. I need some more analysis on that. So, right here, we know that we can narrate from the children of Israel, and some Sahaba did, right? And some of the Tabi'in did, and some of the Tabi'in did, and some of the books of tafsir do, right? But what do we do when we take this hadith? And there's another hadith where the Prophet ﷺ reprimanded Umar radiallahu anhu for reading some of the books of the Jews. Now, that hadith, some say there's actually a weakness in it, but let's even say, and even if there is a weakness in it, it's still, it's still there, and there's still some strength to it, and there's other hadiths surrounding this too. How do we look at all of these hadith talking about Ahl al-Kitab? When it comes to Sharia matters, the scholars of tafsir actually discuss this in detail. When it comes to Sharia matters, when it comes to matters of law, we don't follow the laws of the past. When it comes to matters of Aqidah, we don't follow the Aqidah of the past. However, when it comes to stories of the prophets or something like that, or something that agrees, in principle, if anything agrees with Islam, then we take it. And if anything disagrees with Islam, we reject it, right? However, there's some middle ground to it. We neither accept it nor reject it. That's as based upon another hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. Don't say it's wrong, don't say it's right. Okay? So that's something just to give you context about when we talk about Ahl al-Kitab. Now, you might be wondering, why is he talking about Ahl al-Kitab when we're talking about Hinduism today? By the way, I just want to mention something about Ahl al-Kitab. There's a verse in Book of Jeremiah. I'm sure you guys talked about this when you were talking about Christianity. There's a verse in Book of Jeremiah, chapter 8, verse 8. For the people who say that, we believe that yuharifunahu, right? We in the Quran it says yuharifunahu. They change it, right? They change the words. If we look at the book of Jeremiah, chapter 8, verse 8, which is found in the Old Testament, that's exactly what it says too. It says, how can we trust the law? How can we say, the wise men say we have the law when the lying pens of the scribes have written it? So the Old Testament itself testifies that even at the time of the prophet Jeremiah, the Old Testament was corrupted, right? And there's a lot of things we can talk about, but we're not going to go into that tangents. Okay, going into Hinduism. Is Hinduism part of Ahl al-Kitab? If we reference chapter 35, verse 24, we know there were prophets sent to the past. We know every nation was sent a prophet. But can we say Hinduism for sure is part of Ahl al-Kitab? That means they were the people of the book. We don't know. They might have been given a book. And it's very likely they would have given a book, but we don't say anything qat'i, which Allah Azza wa Jalla, His Prophet ﷺ did not say. So if someone comes and asks you, was Krishna a prophet or was Ram a prophet? You could do your research, speculate and all that. And to be honest, it's very likely that there were some Indian prophets sent to India. But can we say for sure that these are the prophets of God? Well, we don't have any qat'i proof for that. We can't just say things like, we can say them, but at the end always say, Wallahu alam. We don't know for a fact. Don't take it as a fact, right? Don't take it as a fact. But we're going to talk about some things, inshallah, today. Some of the other things I want to mention is, we know from the hadith of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, narrated by Jabir ibn Abdullah, that every prophet used to be sent to his nation only, but the Prophet, he says, but I, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, have been sent to all of mankind. And so the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was sent to all of mankind. And so even if there were prophets of the past, we take the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ today. Even if there were books of the past like the Vedas and the Upanishads, which we'll discuss today, the Quran is the final word of God. And we can prove this in whatever ways you want. In so many different ways we can prove this. but okay, let's proceed because we're gonna have to accelerate a little bit. Context of the hadith, context of discussion today. The discussion today will be based upon the hadith of Al-Bara radiallahu anhu. It's a very, 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 very long hadith, very interesting hadith. So many things we can derive from that hadith, but we're not gonna go into the hadith too much. I'm sure you guys have already covered it in previous lessons. So we're gonna look at the 3 questions that are going to be discussed, that are gonna be the context and the backbone of our discussion today. These are the 3 questions, which technically they're actually 4 questions, but the 3 main questions, actually the 3 questions, and we'll add the 4th question as well, because the hadith mentions the 4th question, as narrated in the Sunan of Imam Abi Dawood and in the Musnad of Imam Ahmad, rahimahumullah. Who is your Lord? What is your religion? And who is the man who was sent among you? And the 4th question is, what did you do? The correct answers to these are Allah, Islam, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and what did you do? Stick to the book of Allah. Okay? Now, if I was organized, I would be like, okay, let's start with who is your Lord and have all these slides. And then I have what is your religion and have all these slides. And right, I'm not organized like that. So I'm not going to do that because, to be honest, it didn't feel natural to me. But and I apologize if this is a distraction for some of you, but inshallah it's gonna work. I hope it works. I want you to keep these, and I want you to do some analytical thinking today, and you connect some of these questions to some of the discussion that we're going to do today. In addition to that, another reason I didn't do that is because there are some things, multiple things can hit upon like there could be one thing in Hinduism that could relate to both who is your Lord and what is your religion, for instance, right? And so just keep that in mind, inshallah. Let's talk about Hinduism now. Hinduism. Let's go to the, okay, before I continue, everyone with me? So Ahl al-Kitab is not clearly defined as only Christianity, Judaism. Not necessarily, no. Ahl al-Kitab can, there are, for instance, the Magians, right? And there's actually a sect, this is a side discussion. I don't want to go too into it, but there's actually a sect. They said that this is actually the followers of John the Baptist. And by the way, when we say Ahl al-Kitab, there were some when India was taken over, or when India was in a sense liberated by the Muslims, right? They treated the Hindus at the time like they would treat Ahl al-Kitab. So they included them in Ahl al-Kitab. But, this discussion of who is included in Ahl al-Kitab is a little bit larger discussion. And it's not, there's not, there's a little bit more into it. Okay. Yes. G. Okay. I like the G. Okay, I thought they were treated like that because of Hanafi fiqh. Yeah, so that but Hanafi fiqh, they take they used some of their usul to derive that or to conclude that. So they would not come under mushrikeen. There's a discussion on this, and when it said that when the Quran referred to the mushrikeen, like for in the hadith, umirtu an uqatila hatta الناس يقولوا or hatta يقول لا إله إلا الله, or in another hadith, they said this is actually clarified in, this is a very somewhat controversial hadith that people try to make controversy out of. It's actually clarified in another hadith in Musnad of Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, that actually this umirtu an uqatila al-mushrikina, and this here it refers to that mushrikeen refers to the people, the pagans of Mecca. The pagans of Mecca are a little bit different than Hinduism, and we'll talk about that today, because you would imagine that Hinduism is actually all polytheistic, and that's true to a certain degree. But you'll realize that there's actually more to this religion than most people know, especially in the West. Okay, I love this. I love the discussion. Keep them coming. Okay, let's continue. I can never pronounce this word, so you are allowed to laugh, and I will forgive you. It's etymological analysis. Okay, what is the linguistic analysis of Hinduism? Where does the word Hindu come from? Hindu actually comes from the mispronunciation of Sindhu. Who mispronounced it? The Persians, or at least they blame the Persians. They say that the Parsis or the Persians mispronounced the Sindhu River. The people, so they were going and they're like the people who live past the Sindhu River. They called them Hindu because they couldn't pronounce the S correctly, so they said Hindu. Actually, the Greeks used to call the land of India Indoi, and they actually called it India. Indus Valley. Yes, so from the Indus Valley, they got actually Indoi, and then eventually India. And so the first person actually, and so this is how the word Hinduism came about. And Hinduism, by the way, in a sense, is not the correct name of the religion. And we will talk about that. Hinduism is not a correct name of the religion. And I have a story to share about that. By the way, this is not something uncommon. I want to compare this to the Hebrew. Where does the word Hebrew come from? Hebrew, the first person to be called Hebrew was actually Abraham. And they said, and it refers to his descendants as well. And they said it comes from the root word Ivri. And there's actually in the Midrash 3 opinions concerning this. For instance, Rabbi Yehuda, he would say that it means on the opposite side. So Abraham, so he took it in a more spiritual sense, that Abraham believed in God and the rest of the world did not. And so it's like that was what the other side meant. Some said it actually refers to Eber, who is Eber, who some say is actually Hud alayhi salam, but really there's no connection if you actually look deeper into it. And Eber was one of the, he was one of the people who was monotheistic, and he carried that banner from his ancestors, Nuh alayhi salam and Shem alayhi salam. And then they also say it came from the river, because he was on the other side of the river. So there's comparison with the Hebrew. Second person, by the way, in the Bible called Hebrew was Joseph. Isn't that Persians turned S to H, like Asura versus Ahura? Yes. So they turned from Sindhu, they went Hindu. Yes. So they mispronounced. Well, we say mispronounced because when we talk about words, we talk about how they are said in the original language. So they would have called it Sindhu. The people who lived past the Sindhu River, at least most of them would have called it Sindhu. And so according to obviously the Persians, it's not a mispronunciation. It's just how they would analyze these words. But according to the people who passed, the letter was switched, and so they pronounced it Hindu. Ancient civilization Indus. Yes. So let's do a temporal analysis. Since when is Hinduism around? Some say that Hinduism existed since the beginning. This is more of a metaphysical idea. In a sense, we would say, well, if Islam is Hinduism, or at least this Hinduistic interpretation was Islam, then sure, Islam existed from the beginning too, right? It's actually not Hinduism, it's actually Islam. But really, if we were to look at the archaeological evidence, it started with the Saraswati civilization back in the Indus Valley around 5000 BCE. Ironically, it actually started in Pakistan. I say ironically because after the partition, Pakistan was actually the predominantly Muslim country, and India became the predominantly not just Hindu, but other religions as well. So about 5,000 years old, that means 3000 BCE. And some of the archaeological evidences you can see up there, that's the people tree. Some of the, on a tablet, that's some of the archaeological evidence found. But one of the evidences that Hinduism actually existed from that time is Buddha. Buddha is actually a very documented figure. Most actually figures are debated as to whether they existed or not. Even Jesus, Isa is debated as to whether he existed or not. But to be honest, I don't know how. I mean, there's so much evidence that he did. But there's mythicists out there. The Prophet Muhammad is one of the is in such a unique position that, I mean, if you're not serious about if you have done no studies, then you would say, okay, he didn't exist. But there's no way you study all the evidences and say the Prophet didn't exist. Buddha also there's a lot of evidence, carvings and stuff that indicate that he did exist. And by the time of Buddha, there was already mantras, and there were already certain ritual worship that existed at the that dates back to the Hindu rituals. What is the main purpose of Hinduism? The main purpose, or the original pursuit of Hinduism, is very simple. It's understanding the world around them. They wanted to understand the world around us. We are trying to understand the world around us too. We understand it through, the true faith, right? The faith that Allah Azza wa Jal bestowed since the time of Adam alayhi salam, which is Islam. So the goal of Hinduism, the establishment of Hinduism, was trying to understand the world around them. And actually, this initially led to what you would technically call animism. And we'll talk about that later. I want to go into a small side point. Do we need to prove the existence of God? I want some discussion today. Can we just give me simple answers? Do we need to prove the existence of God? No. Okay. Bilal, you say no. That's a good, if our fitrah is tainted. That's a good question, Ahmed. What if our fitrah is tainted? So what do you think, Ahmed? So would you say yes or no? And everyone else too. And if you're confused, It's good because there's actually arguments to both, and it is historically Islamic scholars. There were many Islamic scholars who had arguments both ways. Some like Imam al-Ghazali, rahimahullah, they preach that no, we should look at the external world and derive the existence of God through that. For instance, on the other hand, Imam Ibn Taymiyyah, Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah, rahimahullah, he would say, I mean, no, you don't need to prove the existence of God. It's in our fitrah. And, initially, it should be in our intuition. You're right. And we're living in the Western world, and we might think, okay, why, like, that doesn't make sense in us. Like, why we have to prove God, right? We have to prove God. But eventually you start seeing, when you actually look deeper into the psychology of humanity and the need of humanity and the way our brain works and the way we have this urge for a higher power. Ibn Taymiyyah's point starts to make a lot of sense. But Imam al-Ghazali, rahimahullah's point, Hujjat al-Islam's point, also makes sense. So do we need to prove the existence of God? Some say yes. I mean, it's a discussion. The bottom line is that God exists. Actually, I was in one of my teacher's class, I forget which teacher, but we were talking about, do we need scripture to prove the existence of God? And the answer was no, we don't need scripture to prove the existence of God. But do we need scripture to know how to worship God? Yes, we need scripture to know how to worship God. Okay, let us continue. We are so behind. Okay, so what is the true name of Hinduism? Dharma. Sanatana Dharma. What does that mean? Dharma, it comes from dara. Dara is the Sanskrit word for the foundation. And so dharma is the foundation of everything, the search for the foundation. Out of all this nature, what is the root of that? What is the root of this? And this dharma, the word dharma is used by all the Indic religions. So that's Sikhism, Jainism, Hinduism, Buddhism. They use it all. Santana is the permanent and universal answer to the human condition. That is what is the answer to the foundation? What is this foundation? It is Santana. So the actual name of Hinduism is Sanatana Dharma. I'll give you a story. When I visited, once I had some questions. And by the way, this is something that's very important. We have this very, we always say to a lot of people, like, if you have questions about Islam, go to imams, go to people of knowledge, and they'll tell you they'll tell you, right? They'll tell you, what the answers to certain questions are. And don't just ask lay people because they might not know. And so, at least personally, I believe that we need to try to apply that same justice to be consistent with other religions. So if I have questions about Christianity, I'll go ask students of knowledge of Christianity. In divinity school, I'll go ask professors. By the way, till this day, no one has been able to answer this one question. Why does it say in the book of Numbers, chapter 23, verse 19, for God is not a man, lo yuvin Adam, nor is he the son of man. And then Jesus describes himself as son of man. How can you say this is not a contradiction? No one, doctors, divinity, no one. Anyways, going back to this. So I had some questions about Hinduism. So I went to a Hindu temple. I visited a Hindu temple. I talked to the Pandit there. And I told them, first I said Hinduism, and they said, no, I'm sorry, Santana Dharma. He's like, no, stop calling it Santana Dharma. I'm like, why? I'm trying to respect you. And he said, no, if you're born and your parents give you a name, I told him, the reason I say that is because this name was given to you. That's kind of disrespectful. It was given to you. That's not the actual name of your religion. And he said, when you're born, your parents give you a name, correct? And I said, yes. And they said, can you change that name? And he said, you can't change that name. I said, no, you can. You can go to the office and you can get your name changed, right? So this is a little bit different. You already had a name to begin with, and then they changed it. It's not like an original scenario. So that was an interesting discussion. I talked a lot that day with him about a lot of things that we're going to mention today. Okay, next slide. Hinduism. Another thing we have to understand before we even dive into Hinduism. Hinduism is not one religion. Hinduism is not one religion. So that question, what is your religion? Hinduism is not one religion. It's an amalgamation of different religions over a period of time. In this, you will today see, hopefully today, you will see how there was a change as we go through the stages of Hinduism. There was corruption and change from the original message. This is exactly what Islam says. It was the right and true message. Sorry, Isa, you had something to say?
No, I'm good, alhamdulillah.
Okay, alhamdulillah. And so, the message was there. Jesus delivered the right message. Moses delivered the right message. All these prophets of God, alayhim salatu wasalam, delivered the right message, but it was corrupted. Hopefully today you can see some of that corruptions as we study the religion of Hinduism. And we'll talk about certain verses from different scriptures. Does Hinduism have a single founder? No, there's no single founder of Hinduism, right? we could say in a sense that, Islam, at least, Islam goes back to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. He's our authority. In a sense, Christians can say our authority is Christ, even though technically their authority is Paul. And Hindu and Jews can say our authority is somewhat Moses. And other religions can say different things. But Hinduism has no single founder. What Hinduism does have, the closest thing to a prophet Hinduism has is a rishi from Drish. And a rishi is one who experiences Hinduism. He experiences the reality of all things, and that is called a rishi. And we'll talk about rishis a little bit. Very similar to the concept of prophet. Let's talk about certain core beliefs of Hinduism. I know we're still in like the beginning phases, but I want everyone to get a good base. So when we talk about later things like the prophecies of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, you all are on the same page, inshallah, with me. Okay, core beliefs. Number one, Hinduism, at its root, every learned Hindu, at its root, believes that there's only one supreme being. Now, all of you, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that later, but all of you might be like, wait, what? And some of you may be like, I already knew that, right? Brahman, Hindus believe Brahman is that supreme being. Now, what is that nature of that supreme being? We'll talk about that later. But some of the things I want to mention, he's genderless. He's genderless, yet he's referred to as he. He's neither born nor is he begotten. And he is the ultimate reality. Some of the other things I want to talk about is what do Hindus believe in terms of the Maya and the Atman? So what Hindus believe is that there is no disconnection between God and us, right? In a sense, they also believe that everything has divinity in them. And that's your Atman, or your soul, your inner spark, that part of divinity that exists. Now, your Atman is actually clouded or is enclosed by the Maya. That is the external shell, the external reality. And so through this, you're going to go through a cycle called samsara. You're going to keep getting reincarnated, right? Your Atman will never change, but your external shell, your looks and who you are in terms of the external features will change. That's the Maya. The Maya will change, but the Atman will not change. And you'll keep going through this cycle of samsara or reincarnation until you achieve moksha. Moksha is liberation and reuniting with Brahman, with the ultimate supreme being. Now, by the way, there was a deviant sect even in Islam that believed something very close to this. Does anyone know what they were called? It starts with an M. Sikas? Devas. I'm not aware of that sect. Devas. I was referring to the Muwahhiduns. So some sects of within even Muwahhidun, the Muwahhidun, they believed that the Muwahhidin, they believed that we could attain this oneness with God, and this was actually a belief, a deviant sect belief in Islam. Okay, so moksha is the ultimate release. Karma is actually, we have a chat. Nirvana. Yes, so nirvana is actually also very close to moksha. It's actually almost the same exact thing, but nirvana is actually used in Buddhism. So you'll see a lot of similarities between Hinduism and Buddhism. I mean, we're already like running out of time, so I can't even like think about going to Buddhism. But I mean, if we, inshallah, one day if we have time, we can talk about Buddhism and Jainism because they're a little bit different. And they have some very interesting practices. Buddhism removes the entire concept of God. Jainisms are vegan. They're the true vegetarians in a sense. And even talk about Sikhism. Sikhism, by the way, is a blend of not just Hinduism, but also Islam. You find in their books, they mention Allah a lot. But continuing on this karma. What is karma? Karma is the cosmic balancing of good and evil. And that is called karma. And we'll talk about that later. And then Hindus also believe in cyclical time. So they don't believe that time is linear. They believe time is in a cycle, so it keeps repeating itself. Remember this concept because when we talk about the triune Godhead, yes, I said triune Godhead. Christianity was not the first to use these terms. It was actually technically, I don't even think the Hindus were, but in Hinduism there is a triune Godhead, right? And so remember that because they're closely related to cyclical time. in Hinduism, the cyclical time, there's 4 yogas. You don't have to know about this, but there's 4 yogas: the Kritika yoga, the Treta yoga, the Kali yoga, and then the Vapara yoga. Kali yoga is the last yoga. Okay, and those are ages. Yoga means ages. Okay. We're gonna skip this. Gayatri, it's something you just be familiar with. It's a central prayer. It's asking for illumination. It actually says, "Let us meditate on the glorious effluxion of the Supreme Being," and it talks about the light. There's always this concept in Hinduism, especially in the more higher authentic scriptures of Hinduism, in the Vedas and in the Upanishads. There's always this concept of the light of the Supreme Being, and it always reminded me of the connection to the ayah of Nur the ayah of Mishkah in Surah An-Nur. It's extremely, it's very similar. Wallahu alam. Transfer of knowledge. Quickly talk about, before we're almost there. We're almost about to begin. Transfer of knowledge. Vedas weren't actually written down until way later, right? So for our longest time, for thousands of years, it was oral transmission. This is how the ideas of Hinduism were communicated. Now, oral transmission, the oral transmission, it has problems. Now, does it mean that you cannot preserve oral something in an oral format? No, there are many societies who perfected this manner. By the way, the Hebrews, the Jews were very good at this for a certain time. So oral transmission does exist. But is it foolproof? No, it's not. And by the way, there's a lot of people, and I'll do a comparison later, there's a lot of people who attack Hadith tradition and they say it was orally passed till Sahih Bukhari. Like, no, that's actually absolutely false. Even if you don't want to, first of all, Muwatta already tells you wrong. The Muwatta is already an evidence that you're wrong, but they'll say, oh no, that was in the end of first century, beginning of second century, or later on, right? Or end of mid second century. Well, okay, that's fine, because there's a lot of other texts that we can also refer to. What about the Sahifa of Sa'id ibn Umada? What about the Sahifa of Samura bin Jundub? What about the Sahifa of Hamad ibn Munabbih? By the way, this Sahifa was translated by Dr. Hamidullah recently. And you can actually find this. What about the Sahifa of Abdullah ibn Amr ibn al-As? This is actually a Sahifa called the Sahifa Sadiqa. It's said to have about 1,000 hadith traditions. The Sahifa of Jabir ibn Abdullah, the Sahifa of Abdullah ibn Abbas, even the Sahifa, at least some written portion of what Ibn Umar had. Because we know from Nafi'i that he used to sometimes read certain passages before he would go to the market to explain it to instruct them and give them advice. So this concept that there was no written tradition earlier than this is not a true concept. There were, and there's many evidences to show that, but that's a larger discussion not related to this. Oral transmission. 2 things you need to know about oral transmission. Guru is one who destroys ignorance. Guru can be anyone, right? Like if you're it's not limited to just, if you're a teacher, you're a guru, because you're destroying the ignorance in the concept of science or of religion or English or something like that. So one of the things I really appreciated about this is they have 3 major, and Swami is one who has mastered knowledge. So you go and you learn from a Swami. 3 things that they've really touched upon is pranam, respect; prashna, ask; and seva, serve. This is how you go and learn knowledge. This is very similar to, actually, this is something, it reminds us of the way ilm, someone who seeks knowledge in Islam should behave. Pranam, respect the knowledge. Prashna, ask questions, but within limitations. We know the hadith of don't ask too many questions. And what that means is that's not killing the spirit of curiosity, but that's rather focusing your intuition and your ability to think and reason before just asking every question that comes to your head. And thank God not all questions were asked, because that's actually a mercy from Allah Azza wa Jal. Seva, service, to be in service of the teacher. And we know this from many of our own traditions. We're gonna skip this because we don't have time, but there's symbols of in Hinduism, like the Om symbol, which is actually a sound. It's actually, they say that when the gurus and when the teachers, they entered into a state of meditation, they could actually hear a sound, and they call this a vibration in deep meditation. And they would hear this sound, Om, 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 right? And they would say it doesn't actually have any meaning larger than this. Is literally just, it's a vibration in, almost like Brahmin, the vibrations of Brahmin in a sense. And they actually, this is, not to make qiyas and disappoint all my Zahiri, don't they say this vibration created everything? In a sense, so they would say, in a sense, they would say not necessarily the vibration created everything, but the fabric of that vibration created everything. Because Brahman, they would say that the Brahman is literally the universe. In some of the actual texts of Hindus, they would say, there's a discussion going on, who knows who created all this? And then they say even Brahman doesn't know who created all this, which is a very interesting thing, because that is their supreme being. And they're like, even he doesn't know who created this. So there is an idea in Hinduism where the universe is infinite and the universe is God, right? Now we know the universe is not, it's finite. And we know this from Hubble's law. We extrapolate and we go back to the Big Bang and all that. Okay. We know okay, so the other symbol is swastika, good luck from four corners of the world, obviously taken by the Nazi and the Nazis, and they flipped it over and they did a lot of bad things. Lotus, the lotus is actually very famous in Hinduism and in Buddhism. It's a very symbolic sign, because it's a lotus rises from the mud, so it shows that perfection from all the dirtiness and all the pollution around you, and it's a symbolism of perfection from the surrounding corruption and chaos. Okay, finally we can start with who is your Lord, right? Who is your Lord? But that's the first question, right? Hindus believe, some say, they believe in 330 million gods and all that. That's to some degree true. Hinduism, is it pantheistic? Is it henotheistic? Or is it monotheistic? You can be an atheist Hindu. You can be a Hindu who believes there's many gods. You can be a Hindu that believes there's only one God. You can believe a Hindu that believes there's only 7 gods. You can be a Hindu, whatever you want. There's no restrictions to Hinduism. Now that concept is kind of hard to imagine for some people, right? But, the famous statement of Gandhi, they asked him, who is your Lord? And he says, Allah and he says Allah and Christ and Krishna, right? He says all of them are my Lord, right? All of them are my God. And actually, the founder of Pakistan, he actually commented back. He said only a Hindu can say that, right? What does that mean? Because Hinduism is an open religion in a sense. It doesn't have restrictive or most branches of Hinduism don't have that restrictive philosophy where we're right and everyone else is wrong, right? And they actually pride themselves on that. Islam has an exclusive claim to truth. Christianity has an exclusive claim to truth, right? But saying that everything is right is actually contradictory. And hopefully, if we have time, we'll talk about the contradiction of the fallacy of analogy, saying that there's multiple paths up the mountain, and right, this is actually a fallacy of analogy. You cannot use an analogy like that. Actually, I could take that very same analogy and prove monotheism, right? So that's something to think about. In essence, the learned Hindus, most of the learned Hindus, they don't believe, they don't go to these multiple gods. They actually believe and they try to reunite with the supreme being Brahman. Later on, a lot of common people, in a sense, who are not very learned, they take these idols. Why do they take these idols as gods? They take them because they cannot imagine the infinite. So they say that we take these as our, so that we can imagine what the infinite would be. An intercessor, in a sense. We know that the Quraysh did something very similar to this. We know that the Quraysh, they believed in Allah as the supreme Lord, but they had these idols that they took as intercessors. And so this is something very common that happened in some of the at least modern versions of Hinduism. Okay. In a sense, if we were to talk about this, it seems that it's henotheism. It's henotheistic is the best thing you can call, I think, Hinduism. Henotheistic means that they believe in one God, but they don't deny the possibility of other God. Now, there was a time when I was like, they would put, when we were learning La ilaha illallah and why, it's negation and why the different, the Mu'tazila said this and all this. I was thinking to myself, I'm like, why are we going through this discussion? It says La ilaha illallah, there's no God but Allah. Why do we have to go through in existence and all that, right? But then that discussion made a lot more sense to me when I was like, oh, because henotheism would say that there's one God, but they don't deny the possibility of other gods. And that's what makes the Shahada so beautiful. It denies the possibility of any other God except Allah. Brahman is the supreme deity. We already talked about that. The Hindu trinity is called the Trimurti. That's Brahma, not to be confused with Brahman. Brahma is the creator God. Vishnu is the sustainer God. And Shiva is the destroyer. Brahma creates, Vishnu sustains, and as the cycle goes round and round, Shiva eventually destroys. And Shiva does a dance before he destroys. Was the Vedas purely Aryan, or were there Dravidian influences to mind them? The Aryans were descendants of the Yamana who believed in who are the father of Indra, Vishnu. Okay, we'll talk about that. Actually, we won't actually touch on that. But that's a good question. Maybe we can answer that in the Q&A. But that's a good question. Were there Dravidian influences? You can. People would deny it. People would deny it, but I think with the Rig Veda, there's a lot of influences, not just Dravidian. There's a lot of influences from the Mesopotamian area. There's a lot of influences from Babylonian texts, right? Actually, the whole analogy creating, saying that Brahma is actually Abrahma and Saraswati is Sara comes from those. So inshallah, we'll talk about that. But let's continue for now. And let me know your questions, inshallah, at the end. Okay, who is Brahmin? Okay, so let's talk about who is Brahmin. That's an interesting question, because when we're going to talk about now who Brahmin is, you're going to realize something. You're going to realize that he seems a lot like, he seems very monotheistic, almost like they believe in a similar God, because I'm not going to say same God, because they have very fundamental differences, but it's just an interesting thing, inshallah, to think about. Okay, so we're going to start. Okay. He is the one, Ekkam Avidityam, and this is mentioned in the Chandogya Upanishad, Ekkam Avidityam. He is one only without a second. Okay, and Nakasya Kasich Janita Nagadipa, that he neither has, of him there are neither parents nor lords. Na Pratima Asti, Na Tasya Pratima Asti. There is no likeness of him. Okay, and he is bodiless and he is pure. Shudhama Pop Vidham. He is bodiless and he is pure. Now, all these things seem to be very much like قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. Right? Surah Ikhlas. And is it possible? Can we make that connection that perhaps this was the original message that was eventually lost in translation, or not just in translation, but eventually lost throughout the history of time? There's so many other things we could talk about. Oh, friends, do not worship anyone but him, the divine one. Praise him alone. Verily great is the glory of the divine Lord. There's only one God, not the second, not at all, not a lot, not the least bit. This is actually not part of, this is actually rather a Brahma Sutra. And it says, Ekkam Braham, Divitvya, Nastina, Kinchan. That there is only one God, not the second, not a lot, not at all, not the least bit. Bhagavad Gita really hits the nail on the hammer, because Bhagavad Gita, as we'll later talk, is the fundamental text of Hinduism, or it's debated that it is probably the most authoritative text of Hinduism. Those whose intelligence has been stolen by material desires surrender unto demigods and follow the particular rules and regulations of worship according to their own natures. So those who worship demigods, they follow their own particular laws and they submit to their own, basically, in a sense, saying that if you take demigods, that's not the true worship. The true worship is the worship, or that worship of Brahman, right? And by the way, Krishna is an avatar of Vishnu. Okay, so let's talk about Brahma. Brahma, the creator God, he has 4 faces. Why does he have 4 faces? Because those are the 4 yugas, those are the 4 directions, and those are the 4 Vedas. He created the 4 Vedas. He rides a swan, and his consort, or it's said consort, it's not wife, it's a consort, or is Saraswati, we could say it's wife, who is the goddess of learning. Vishnu, you see Vishnu, he's the preserver. He rides an eagle named Garuda. I'm sorry, I'm going fast through this, but inshallah we need to finish soon, so I'll go a little bit faster. 2 consorts. He has Lakshmi as his consort and Bodhiva as his consort, and he has many avatars, including Rama and Krishna. Rama, obviously Ramayan, and Krishna, obviously Bhagavad Gita, which we will talk about very soon. Shiva is the destroyer. He has a 3rd eye in the center. Which is because there's a lot of other traditions in the history of the world that have that 3rd eye in the center. Rides bull named Nandi. He destroys the universe with a dance. That's why you can see him doing in that dance, and you usually see statues of Shiva always in a very different position, and that's because he actually destroys the universe with a dance. We're not going to make a joke here, but yes. Consorts, Parvati and Sati. Parvati is very important because she is the mother of Ganesh. His son is Ganesh, who is the remover of obstacles, and Murugan, who is the god of war. So you already see these gods being multiplied. But you see, these are demigods. These are literally what we know from Surah Nuh, right? وَقَالُوا لَا تَذَرُنَّ آلِهَتَكُمْ وَلَا تَذَرُنَّ وَدًّا وَلَا سُوَاعًا وَلَا يَغُوثَ وَيَعُوقَ وَنَسْرًا. This is exactly what they did, right? This is exactly what they did. They took the legends of the pious people of the past and they turned them into gods. Very similar thing we could see through these stories, through these epics. Really, they're called epics, right? And we'll talk about that. Avatars, we're gonna skip that, but there's a lot of avatars. Vishnu has about 10, Brahma has a couple, Shiva has about 28, as mentioned in Linga Purana. Lakshmi has, Devi has, Ganesh has, all of them. I don't know if Hanuman has. I think he also has. Books of Hinduism. Let's talk about the books of Hinduism. The best way in Hinduism, the best way to study the religion is not through a book, but through becoming a rishi. A rishi is one who goes and seeks this knowledge and meditates and connects with this divine and takes all these knowledges. However, when a rishi does this, a rishi talks in very poetic forms, right? And so we'll talk about that later. Now, first thing is, the best way to study religion is through a rishi. You can't really find them much here. So the second best way is to study the lives of the rishis and the sayings of the rishis, which is the scripture. However, they talk in poetry, and poetry is very hard for certain people. It's very abstract. And by the way, I want you to keep this in mind to see why people started taking demigods, because abstractness, they had a lot of abstractness in the Vedas and stuff like that. Even though the Vedas, you could very much argue, were moving, they didn't really preach this idea of multitude of gods. They preached one God. Okay, most authoritative text, we'll talk about that, is the Bhagavad Gita. So let's start with what the texts of Hinduism are. There's two primary texts of Hinduism. There's the Shruti and the Smriti. The Shruti is the higher form of text, which is the more authoritative form of text. The Shruti, it comes from the Sanskrit word Shrudva, which means to be heard from meditation. And this means that this is something that they heard while meditating. Vedas, it comes actually from the Sanskrit word vid, which means to know or knowledge. And it's about the nature of reality. We have 4 Vedas: the Rig Veda, the Samveda, the Yajur Veda, and the Atharva Veda. Rig Veda is the oldest Veda. And that kind of connects to your question, a question asked earlier. And you can actually see there was actually an article very recently written, actually we don't have time. Sorry about that. But moving on, the Yajur Veda focuses on liturgy, and there's different parts to it. The Upanishad, for instance, Upanishad, the Upani, I think Upanishad, by the way, is one of the coolest names. Upani means come near, and Shad means destroy. So what Upanishad is, come here so I can destroy your ignorance of what the reality of the world is. There's 108 in total number. Only 11 are like the main central ones, if that makes sense. Or the main ones, in a sense. There's a lot more I want to mention, but I want to actually ask Isa if should I go into more detail, or do you think I should cover just the surface level and inshallah keep it going for a couple more we take?
So it's been an hour. And if you're okay with it, we could do a part 2. You could do Q&A now, and you can carry on, so you don't have to cram too much. And you mentioned a lot of things you want to share later, so we want to make sure that you get the chance to do it.
Barakallahu feek. And I hope this is kind of, I know I had to center around the 3 questions, and I hope it's centered around that, inshallah, or at least.
Best, whatever methodology you take is fine. But that's just for the cross comparison side, right? So, alhamdulillah, jazakallah khairan. Maybe we, with your permission, if you want, we can just open it up for Q&A.
Definitely. Yeah, let's do Q&A, inshallah, instead. And we'll pause here.
Tamam. So for anyone who has any questions, you can raise your hand, or you can send a message in the Zoom webinar chat, inshallah. Now it's a lot of information, but many people there, they don't really know very much about Hinduism. And I would even venture to say in our time, working in the dawah with YSLM, and you can see that dawah to Hindus is a very underserviced field. And the reason for that is probably because it's not as easy to break in and learn a lot about the culture, the religion.
Definitely. Um, and kind of going off of that, you said before I turn to the question is and that's true. And the reason, actually, one of the reasons it's so hard to convince a Hindu or someone who really believes in Hinduism is because they will look at you and they will say you're right, and they will say you're right. That's it. I mean, and that's difficult. I mean, they won't necessarily say that. They won't necessarily say that you're wrong, and that just makes it difficult in the sense that, well, yes, I know I'm right, but we're claiming an exclusive truth, so how do we get to that? Okay, sorry. Okay, let's see the question, inshallah. So what were the three? Sorry, I missed the part, but what are the three questions? So the three questions that we're centering all this around, because we want to look at this from the perspective of Islam. So the three questions are the questions of the grave. Who is your Lord? What is your religion? And who was the man that was sent to you? So the correct answers to those, and I hope every one of us says these correct answers on the day, is Allah, the religion is Islam, and our Prophet is Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the fourth question is, what did you do? And that the answer to that question is, read and stuck to the book of Allah Azza wa Jalla. Okay. Earlier you mentioned the Hindus. To my knowledge, I was under the impression they haven't been deciphered. How do we know that what they believed? They have not been deciphered. Well, for the most part, they have not been deciphered. Actually, they even debate whether that their language was a language. And you're right, they have not been deciphered. So how do they know what they believe in? They know, I'm not an archaeologist, but they know through the actual material evidence. So not from the textual record, but from the material evidence. So you see certain features of carvings of idols and different statues, and they would take that and they would compare it to the later artifacts found down the line later in the centuries, and they would compare some similitudes towards them. This is actually done with even in the Maya tradition of Viracocha and the other gods, and you constantly see themes. And so in a sense, it's a very scientific approach to it. And we don't know exactly what they believed because we can't decipher their text. However, there are efforts being made from what I heard last. Are you trying to say that prophets came to Hindus and the message got diluted over a period of time? What I'm trying to say is that there are clear ayat from the Quran which indicate that every people were sent a prophet, and there are clear hadith that mention that there were a lot of prophets. Now, by the way, the hadith about there being 124,000 prophets, to my knowledge, wallahu alam, that's a da'if jiddan hadith. That's not actually, the number is not the number, and the number doesn't matter. The number doesn't matter. There were a prophet sent to every people, and actually a book given to every people, or a book given not necessarily to every prophet, but a book. There were more books than just the books that we know of, such as the Zabur and the Injil, and the Torah and the Suhuf of Ibrahim. I mean, one of the hadith in Masjid in Ibn Hibban, it talks about the scrolls of Sheath, alayhi salatu. But there's authentication matters to this. But the point is that there are other books, we just might not know about them. So am I saying that prophets came to the Hindus? I'm saying maybe, but I'm saying Allahu Alam, because we cannot say anything for sure, right? But it seems from that, taking the little qiyas approach there, even though I'm not qualified to, that is inshallah or at least that's one of the points I am making. Okay. It is likely that people in the Indian, wait, did I skip a question? No. It is likely that people in the Indian subcontinent had messengers, and was it likely before Ibrahim ﷺ, like 4,000 years ago? Actually, this is a very interesting theory, but it's very likely that Ibrahim ﷺ's Hanif religion, Islam, influenced the Hindu religion and the development of the Hindu religion. The reason I say this is because there's actually some theories connecting Brahma to Abrahma, or to Abraham or Avram, and they would say that Brahma is actually Abrahma and Saraswati is Sarah, and his two kids are the Ismail and Ishaq, and they would make these connections. Now, how powerful are these connections? How authenticated? There's not much evidence. However, there's one evidence that I think is very powerful, is the Rig Veda. They've actually established that about 1/4 of the Rig Veda is very similar to a textual tablet found in Mesopotamia, or in the regions, if we were to believe the biblical narrative of Ur and Uruk, that's where Abraham was, and so it matches that. So there is likelihood that they had prophets and messengers sent there. By the way, from some scripture, from some books and analysis of history, some do claim that Ham, who was the son of Nuh alayhi salam, actually went to the Indian subcontinent. Can you please explain about who? Can you please explain about the analogical fallacy bit you mentioned before? Yes. So this concept of that there are multiple truths in the world, and that everyone can arrive at the or there's multiple paths up to that one truth. The way the Hindus use it would actually be contrary, would be contradictory. The reason why is because they would say an atheist has his truth, and they would say a Muslim has his truth, and they would say a Hindu who worships Shakti has a truth. When in reality, these are contradictory messages, because there is either a God or there is no God. Right? You cannot have both at the same time. You can have a superposition. This is not quantum mechanics. You can have superposition when it comes to this, right? Second analogical fallacy is, I could very much say that the mountain itself is not the truth. The mountain itself is, well, it is the truth, and it is Islam, and there's multiple paths up up Islam. And I could say that back in the day it was actually the Hinduistic path, and now that got destroyed or blocked off, or now there's a lot of shrubs growing around it, right? I could take the analogy and play around with it, right? For instance, I could say, today when you go up a mountain, there's so many paths up the mountain, but you don't take all the paths up the mountain, because some have shrubs in them, some have animals in them, some, and that's very possible. I could say that Islam was the truth, and these different civilization or different prophets in the past, they tried to guide people up that truth, but they corrupted it. And so, can you go through Christianity and come back to Islam? So many Christians have reverted to Islam. Can you go through these wrong paths and come back to the straight path, Sirat al-Mustaqim? Yes, you can. So I think, and there's actually a philosophical argument there, but I'm not going to go into that because it gets a little bit time consuming. How old are these depictions, and why are they all white? They're all white. Actually, it's very funny because a lot of these depictions are not actually correct. These depictions are actually incorrect because, first of all, gold, people wearing gold, all these gods and goddesses and rishis wearing gold. No, these people were in the forest. They were not wearing gold. They were not riding chariots covered in gold, right? So these are again, when you come to the modern age where we start painting everyone white and all this and that, is it possible that these early people were white? Actually, there's a possibility. Yes, they were, because they would say that they're from the Aryan race. And actually, when they first initially came and blended, it's possible some of them were white, but this is more of a cultural issue. And actually, it says it in their books, Na Pratimasi, he has no image. So why are you making an image? Because we can't imagine God. Well, that's the whole point. Okay. Sorry, I joined a little late. You might have already addressed this. I'm a little confused as to whether Hindus are somewhat monotheistic with a belief in a trinity or polytheistic. Hindus are all of them and none of them. You will find Hindus that are atheists. You will find Hindus that are monotheistic. You will find Hindus that are polytheistic. And later when we talk about the sects of Hinduism, let me see if I can quickly go there actually. Denomination. You see here, the Vaishnavas, they worship Vishnu. The Shaivas, they worship Shiva. The Smartas, they say that we follow the Vedas and we worship Ganesha and Surya and Shiva and all these people. Shaktas say they worship only Shakti or Devi, right? So Hinduism is an amalgamation of a religion. We treat Hinduism in our mind that it's one religion, but it's really not. It's an amalgamation of religion. So there's different types of Hindus. Does that make sense, Malik? Very interesting, because Ibrahim alayhi salam traveled all over the world. Very interesting indeed. Very interesting indeed. Okay. Are you able to connect things like Atma, Moksha, avatars with anything in Islam? Atma, soul, Moksha, that release, that literal, the death. Death is your death. Very interesting analysis. Punar Janam means it can be translated as next life, or it can also be translated as afterlife. Now, Hindus don't take that interpretation. A lot of them do not. But if we believe in that journey of soul, and there's actually some literature on this in Islam, the journey of the soul, but some say 7, but there's different stages of the soul as it journeys through life and after death as well, and barzakh comes into play and all that. Is that perhaps what they're talking about and what they confuse? Very possible. But yeah, that's for moksha. Avatars could very possibly be prophets, or they could also be angels. Allahu Alam. We always say Allahu Alam because these are very hard things to actually decipher. For instance, Manu. Manu is there's a connection. We'll talk about it later. There's a connection that Manu is actually Nuh, and then they say Manu is actually Adam. And they say because in Hinduism, Manu was the one who, there was one Manu who was the starter of this, earthly beings and all that. And there was another Manu who actually was in the flood story. And then actually Matsya, one of the incarnations of Vishnu, comes down as an avatar, and it pulls the boat as a fish. He comes down as a fish and he pulls the boat to safety, or and saves the 7 sages and stuff like that. So definitely there are connections that can be made. Wallahu alam. Will we be learning about the similarities between the Aryan religion and pre-Zoroastrian Iranian religion, because aspects of the Indo-Aryan religion can explain some aspects of the evolution of Hinduism? Absolutely, and there was mixture. There was definitely mixture. But I don't know if we're gonna have time, because that's a very, very, very long topic. Also, do you guys know Zoroastrianism? That is one of the only religions that I know of that lost their entire text, or a lot of their textual sacred scriptures, in one night. Does anyone know how? Alexander the Great came, got drunk, and burned them all. Right? Go Alexander the Great. He's not that great to them, right? He's not that. So, also, what's your opinion on the Aryan migration theory, and why are Hindus against it? The Aryan migration theory. Well, Hindus are not all Hindus are necessarily against it. The reason Hindus are against it is because it's the Arya Dharma. It's the place of, or one of the reasons there exists, the place of origination of the sacred was India. Actually, we see later on in the prophecies, there's some prophecies of the Prophet Muhammad. There's prophecies that Arabian prophet and a prophet who will come, a desert Rishi, will come and liberate and free the people of this island, of this place in Arabia. And so, what is my opinion? I don't really have an opinion on the Aryan migration theory. I don't have the opinion on Bering Strait theory. All these, there's so many counter evidences coming. For instance, what is the Bering Strait theory even something that's strong today? Maybe it was 20, 30 years ago. Today, is it? No. The island hopping theory, there is evidence towards that. The cross-Atlantic theory, even though a little bit harder to believe, there's still evidence towards that. When it comes to these migrations, it's so hard to follow. I mean, you can follow the archaeological evidence, but I mean, I'm gonna be honest, archaeologists have such a difficult task. Have you seen any differences between Hinduism in the southern Dravidian states and the northern states? They seem to have different rituals, customs, as far as I've seen. Absolutely. And that's due to the different sects and due to the different, even the different deities and the different rituals they worship. And actually, this is a very long topic, but what is their concept of revelation and avatar to begin with? And not to mention, by the way, there's geographical differences. There's a strata of geographical influences, as you said, between the northern and the southern states. That's very clear. It does. Thank you, brother. Okay, I'm sorry. I tried to answer those questions as fast as I could. If you guys have any other questions, please let me know. I wish I could go. I mean, some of these questions, you can go into depth into them, right? Like, I mean, the Aryan migration theory, or the this is a very interesting question. The differentiation in the rituals and the customs between not just northern and southern India, but even within southern India, the different stratas of differentiation between the different geographical, not elevations necessarily, but groups of people. And you see a lot of them have. Oh, we have 3 new messages. Sorry. Ooh. Oh my God! I thought Genghis. I thought it was Genghis that burned this stuff. I believe it's Alexander the Great. Where do Hindus? Oh, Genghis burned other things. Don't worry, he burned a lot of things too. Don't worry, he burned other things. Where do they? Man, these people why do they love burning? Seriously, like if I conquered a place, I wouldn't burn it, right? I'd take the scriptures and I mean, I would take it away from the people, but I wouldn't burn it, man. Come on. Where do Hindus derive their beliefs from, especially since there seems to be so much flexibility when it comes to how many gods there are? What is their basis proof for that? So their basis and proof for that is the scriptures themselves. And it's actually, so is there what you're trying to ask, is there something that unifies Hinduism? And there is, and we'll talk about that perhaps next time, about the central themes of Hinduism, or central tenets of Hinduism. And they do have some of these. And I'll give you a brief. These are the general goals of Hindus: to achieve dharma, artha, kama, and moksha. And what do you avoid? The bad kind of kama, krodha, loha, moha, very similar to the 7 sins as we know them from Christianity. somewhat from Islam. That's not actually a concept that exists in Islam like that. But yes. So what is the basis for that? They go back to the lower scriptures. So the lower scriptures actually are filled with demigods. But the higher scriptures, the ones that you're supposed to aim for, they're not. I mean, you can find this concept of pantheism, but I mean, there's also this intense concept of going back to Brahman, who is one supreme being. Ekkam evidityam. It's very clear. The Brahmins would keep saying, "There's not a second. There's not a second." Why are they saying one and not a second, not a second, not a second? Right? Isn't there so much linguistic evidence for the Aryan migration theory, especially since there are similarities between English and Hindi implying a common ancestral language? That could be debated, right? That could be debated because in a sense, there are similarities between every single language. And I mean, I know what you're saying. For instance, English and Hindi, they do have a common ancestral language, but by that standard, all major languages that exist today have some kind of root parent tree that could go back to a single language. Actually, that's a very interesting question, because what did Adam speak? And there's discussion on this, but obviously nothing is verified, but there's discussion on this. What is the original language? Hebrew that Moses speak, was it the same Hebrew? So I'm not saying there's no evidence for Aryan. There is a lot of evidence for Aryan migration theory. What I'm saying is, Allahu alam, I don't have an opinion on it, and I'm no one to have an opinion on it. But I'm just saying that it's to believe in theories concretely is a very, I would say, dangerous thing, right? And rather we should really be scientific about it, or not just scientific, just rational and logical too. I was a little late, so apologies if you have already adjusted, but is it true Hinduism was not a term used for all Hindus until the British collective named the people with the term? Yes, and actually, once the British named them, even if they named the Hindustan, right, and the Muslims would be called Hindus too. So you're right. How do you see Ramay? Where did the question go? Sorry, it got lost somewhere here. How do you see Ramayana and Mahabharata? These are part of the Itihas. Itihas are the Smriti scriptures. Itihas literally means history. Are they purely? Is it likely that a character like Rama and Krishna and Arjuna existed? Very likely. Are the details correct? There are more than 300 versions of the Ramayana in just India. In one version, Rama and Sita are brothers and sisters. Brother and sister. By the way, you would think, okay, but how can brother and sister be lovers? Trust me, go to the Egyptians. They got a lot of this stuff. Okay, so but you're right. I mean, so how do you see them? Can they be trusted? There are common themes between them, and we'll talk about the different types of Ramayana. For instance, the Tulsidas Ramayana, the Kumbha Ramayana, the Valmiki Ramayana. Like there's some differences between them, and you can see these differences actually. Mahabharata, by the way, is the longest poem. Part of the Bhagavad Gita is part of Mahabharata. Same thing with Mahabharata. Mahabharata is actually, so one thing, Ramayana was written by one person, or at least stipulated to be written by one person. The same is not true for Mahabharata or Mahabharat. South Indian here. I know there's a big difference between the two states I grew up in. Yes, definitely. And I think if you want to share some of those differences, but absolutely. People think that, again, I say Hinduism is not one religion. It's an amalgamation of religion. But if I'm also correct, and you can correct me on this, the different people would agree with one another, or not agree. They wouldn't attack one another for their beliefs. Is that true? Because that's the impression I have. But you've lived there, so you have some ethnographical experience that I don't have. So maybe you can help me with that. So basically, Hinduism started off as a bunch of cults, and their scriptures were works of philosophers. When did these cults and philosophers merge into a single religion? Was it during the Islamic rule? It never did. So Hinduism never merged into a single religion. But that's the problem when Westerners come and categorize everything, right? In our mind, it's so fixed that Hinduism is one religion, when in reality, it's not one religion. People wouldn't even call it a religion. They would call it a way of life. And there's multiple types of Hinduism, but they're all branched under the same name. Started off as a bunch of different cults, and they started influencing one another, and the scriptures were works of philosophers. Well, they would say they were the works of, yes, we would call them philosophers. They would call them people who have attained spiritual maturity. Was it during Islamic rule in Britain? No. That Islamic rule in Britain was, I mean, there was some merging, but Islamic rule in that's a whole thing by itself, man. That's really cool. Mahsin the dictator thinking about conquering places. Yes, and I won't burn the things at least. Ramayana and Mahabharata real, at least in some ways, or fiction? Abroad, very possible that some may be real, especially because of the influence Ram has. Especially because of the influence Ram has, and Krishna has, and Arjuna has. It's very likely that these were real things. I mean, Mahabharata is, by the way, Mahabharata is a really interesting poem. But in essence, what is Mahabharata? It's a story of two clans, in a sense, fighting. Very possible that that might have happened. Now, are the details correct? Probably not. At least probably not all of them are correct. But I mean, you have the Kurukshetra battle, and you have the Kauravas, and you have the Pandavas, and you have all these different, very likely that these are somewhat real with, but there are elements of fiction. Sorry, yes.
No need to apologize. We'll take one last question and then we'll resume next week. To the people who stuck around to the end, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala preserve you all. Allahumma ameen. And that question is, isn't Ahl Kitab reserved for Christians and Jews and not all people of other books?
Oh, it's a question for me?
Yes.
Oh, sorry. So Ahl Kitab, I'm going to actually, because I'll be very honest with you, I thought they were, and then I started researching a little bit into it, and there were scholars who thought they weren't, and then I started researching a little bit more into it, and then there's scholars that said no, that's it, and like some other groups, and then I started researching a little bit more into it, and then so I got confused. And there's a story of Imam, I forgot his name, and I think it was Wahab, if I'm not mistaken, it's Wahab, and he got so confused with hadith that he went to Imam Malik and Imam Layth, and Imam Malik told him, take this and leave that, and so they guided him through that. And so I'm going to go to my teacher. I'm going to go to Isa, and he's going to guide us through this question.
Smooth. As far as Ahl Kitab goes, the reason why some of the ulama concluded that all of Ahl Kitab is reduced to An-Nasara, the Christians, and Al-Yahud, the Jews, is because of the context in which they're mentioned in the Quran. Thus, if you look at like all of the collective evidences which other ulama did, you will see that obviously there were other books, there were people from other religions, and as Muhsin masterfully pointed out, you can draw even connections of Tawheed to religions that have been completely divorced from the concept of Tawheedullah, and you can even connect some of the things that you see in Islam by way of worship to stuff that you see in other religions that have nothing to do with Islam. So some said no, this is something that has to be very restricted to just these two, because of the context in which they're mentioned in the Quran, and others said no, because the books will go, so you will have prophets to every nation, books go to every people, then that means that you can't just say that it's just these two. In the Quran, it's speaking about these two, but it never ever specifies that that's it. So this is not a rukhsa for you to go to the Hindu buffet and have a good time and say this is Ahl Kitab. We know brothers having a good time with Chick-fil-A already. We don't want to add, Vishnu's spot to the list. So it's contextual to this academic discussion. It's not, we're not talking about like the rulings and stuff that's derived from Ahl Kitab by way of the Nasara and Yahud in the Quran, and then saying, okay, well, we do qiyas from them to Hindus. Like we're not doing that in this class. We say that for a fifth class where we talk about some usul.
Isa, to be honest, I'm so down with those people who do qiyas, but the only reason I'm stopping is because of my loyalty. I'm trying to be consistent. I'm like, no, don't do qiyas. But
yeah, you got to be consistent, otherwise Ibn Hazm going to taint you, so be careful. Or you might get some Abu Hanifa in your system. You start taking the Muwatir and you start going nuts with it. So we're going to stop there for today. Thank you, Muhsin. We appreciate you taking the time and the energy and the vibrance by which you brought this presentation. It's a lot of information. It's a lot to process, especially for those who don't really ever hear anything about Hinduism. And from the people I know in the chat, you have some Pakistanis, you have some Indians. people from that area. And again, you know, we hope that this understanding will help bolster the dialogue between our community and theirs, and the dawah from our community to theirs. Bi'idhnillahi azza wa jalla. If you want to close with Dariya, and then we'll close the meeting, we appreciate it.
Absolutely. May Allah bless you all. Barakallahu feekum for listening to me. Everything I said, right, obviously is from Allah Azza wa Jal. And when it comes to these topics, this is so important to say this. Everything I say that was right was from Allah, and everything that I say from my own speculation or that is false is from myself and shaitan. And I ask Allah Azza wa Jal for his forgiveness and for his blessings. And so barakallahu feekum for listening. I enjoyed this. I'm sorry if I confused a lot of people. Hopefully the confusion will go down. I get a little bit excited when we talk about certain topics, so I guess the energy can get confused. You look into my mind, that's how it is. It just everywhere. But inshallah, I hope the central point went through, that tawheed, yeah, it existed. People tainted it, and Islam is here to correct it. So barakallahu fikum, as-salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Wal asr innal insana lafi, ba'di a'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Wal asr innal insana lafi khusr illa alladhina amanu wa 'amilus salihati wa tawasaw bil haqqi wa tawasaw bis sabr. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.